I never thought a homemade candle business run from my spare bedroom would bring down an entire HOA board. But here we are, watching Kathleen Wellington get handcuffed in her own driveway while neighbors film on their phones. Let me back up 6 months. My name is Quentin Ramirez, and I moved to Willow Creek Estates in Gilbert, Arizona, right after my divorce finalized. The development was nice enough, cookie-cutter houses painted in shades of beige and tan, palm trees lining streets with names like Serenity Drive and Tranquility Way. I needed a fresh start, and the 3-bedroom house with a pool seemed perfect for rebuilding my life. I work as a freelance graphic designer, which meant I spent most of my time in my home office, but that never caused problems. At least not at first. The HOA seemed normal during the buying process. Monthly fees of $95, standard rules about lawn maintenance and exterior paint colors. I signed the papers without reading every line, which I know now was stupid, but who actually reads all that fine print? The real estate agent assured me it was all standard stuff. 3 months after moving in, my sister Emma convinced me to start making candles with her. She had been doing it as a hobby for years, and with the rise of online marketplaces, she thought we could make some extra money. I was skeptical, but my evenings were lonely, and I needed something to focus on besides work and staring at the walls of my new house. We started small, just experimenting with different scents and wax blends in my kitchen. Emma would come over twice a week, and we would pour candles while drinking beer and catching up. Our candles were actually good, really good. We started with simple scents like vanilla and lavender, but Emma had a knack for creating unique combinations. Her desert sage and citrus blend became our signature scent. Friends asked to buy them, then friends of friends. Within 2 months, we had an Etsy shop and were selling about 50 candles a week. Nothing crazy, just a nice side income that helped cover my mortgage. The first letter from the HOA arrived on a Tuesday in March. I pulled it from my mailbox along with the usual junk mail and bills. The envelope had the Willow Creek Estates logo, a ridiculous clip art image of a willow tree that looked like it was designed in 1995. Inside was a single page, printed on official letterhead. Dear Mr. Ramirez, it has come to our attention that you may be operating a business from your residence at 4782 Tranquility Way. Per the Willow Creek Estates Covenants, Conditions and Restrictions, Section 8.4, no commercial business operations are permitted within residential properties. This includes but is not limited to retail sales, manufacturing and distribution activities. Please cease all business operations immediately or face fines and potential legal action. Sincerely, Kathleen Wellington, HOA President. I read it 3 times, trying to understand what the hell they were talking about. I was not running a store out of my garage. I was making candles in my kitchen and shipping them via USPS. There were no customers coming to my house, no signs, no inventory taking up the driveway. It was less disruptive than someone working a normal job from home. I called Emma that evening. Did you get some weird letter from your HOA? I asked. I do not have an HOA, remember? That is why I pay extra for my house. What did they say? I read her the letter. She laughed. Are they serious? You are not running a factory. Tell them to pound sand. I do not think it works that way. Quentin, you are literally sitting at your kitchen table pouring wax into jars a few hours a week. How is that different from someone knitting sweaters or painting pictures? She had a point. I decided to write back, explaining that this was a hobby that generated some income, not a commercial operation. I kept the tone polite and reasonable. I printed the letter and put it in the HOA Dropbox at the community center the next day. 2 weeks passed. I thought maybe they had accepted my explanation and moved on. Then I got the second letter. This one was longer and more aggressive. It cited specific sections of the CC&Rs using legal language that I barely understood. The key phrase was any activity conducted for profit or compensation. According to their interpretation, my candle business violated this rule. The letter ended with a threat: cease operations within 7 days or face fines of $100 per day. $100 per day. That was insane. I made maybe $300 a week from the candles after expenses. These fines would bankrupt me in a month. I decided to attend the next HOA meeting. It was held on the 3rd Thursday of every month in the community center, a bland building near the main entrance that also housed a small gym and pool. I arrived 15 minutes early and found a seat in the back row. About 20 other residents were scattered around the room, most looking bored or annoyed. Kathleen Wellington sat at the front table with 4 other board members. She was exactly what you would imagine. Mid-50s, blonde haircut in that particular style that screams, "I want to speak to the manager." Wearing a pastel blazer over a white blouse. Her face had that pinched quality of someone who finds joy in enforcing rules. The meeting started with standard business. Approval of last month's minutes, financial reports, discussion of pool maintenance. I zoned out until they reached new business. Kathleen shuffled her papers and cleared her throat. We need to address a growing problem in our community. Several residents have been operating businesses from their homes in violation of our CC&Rs. This includes online sales, tutoring services, and product manufacturing. My stomach dropped. She was not just targeting me. These activities create traffic, noise, and parking issues. They also impact our property values and violate the residential character of Willow Creek Estates. The board has voted to strictly enforce Section 8.4. Anyone found operating a business will face immediate fines and potential legal action. A woman in the third row raised her hand. I teach piano lessons to 3 students a week. Is that considered a business? Kathleen's smile did not reach her eyes. If you are receiving compensation, then yes, that violates our rules. But I have been doing this for 5 years. No one ever complained. The previous board was lax in enforcement. We are correcting that. A man near the front stood up. I run an online consulting business. I never have clients come to my house. I just work from my home office. How does that impact anyone? It is a matter of principle, Kathleen said. When you purchased your home, you agreed to these restrictions. We all did. If we allow exceptions, where do we draw the line? I raised my hand. Kathleen's eyes found me and I saw recognition flash across her face. She knew exactly who I was. Yes, Mr. Ramirez, I received letters about my candle business. I am not having customers come to my house. I am not creating noise or traffic. How exactly am I impacting the neighborhood? Your business involves manufacturing and shipping. That is commercial activity. By that logic, anyone who sells anything online is breaking the rules. What if someone sells old furniture on Facebook Marketplace? What if someone has a YouTube channel and makes ad revenue? Where is the line? Kathleen's jaw tightened. The line is clearly stated in Section 8.4. No commercial operations. It is not complicated. But who decides what is commercial? I make maybe $300 a week. That is barely part-time income. I am not running a factory. The board decides, and we have decided. Cease your operations or face the consequences. The meeting continued, but I barely heard it. I left feeling angry and frustrated. The whole thing felt arbitrary and vindictive. Kathleen had power, and she enjoyed wielding it. Over the next week, I did some research. I called a lawyer who specialized in HOA disputes. His name was Marcus Chen, and his office was in Scottsdale. I explained the situation during our consultation. They can enforce their CC&Rs, Marcus said, but the question is whether their interpretation is reasonable. Many HOAs have business restrictions, but they usually target activities that actually impact neighbors. What you are describing sounds like it would fall under home occupation in most jurisdictions. So what can I do? You have a few options. You can stop the business. You can fight it, which means potentially going to arbitration or court. Or you can try to change the rules by getting on the board yourself or gathering support from other residents. How much would fighting it cost? Easily $10,000. Maybe more if it goes to litigation, and there is no guarantee you would win. I left his office feeling defeated. I could not afford that kind of legal battle. But I also resented being bullied by Kathleen and her board. That evening, Emma called. So what are you going to do? I do not know. Maybe I just stop and avoid the hassle. That is bullshit, Quentin. You are not doing anything wrong. I know, but fighting it is expensive and stressful. I just went through a divorce. I do not have the energy for another legal battle. She was quiet for a moment. What if we did some digging? If Kathleen is being this aggressive, maybe there is a reason. Maybe she has something to hide. Like what? I do not know, but people who are obsessed with rules often have skeletons in their own closets. It is worth looking into. I was not sure about that logic, but Emma was persistent. Over the next few days, she started researching the HOA board. She found their annual financial reports, which were public record for homeowners. She also dug through meeting minutes and old community newsletters. 3 days later, she called me, excitement in her voice. Quentin, you need to see this. I found something weird in the financial reports. I drove to her house in Tempe. She had papers spread across her dining room table, highlighted and marked with sticky notes. Look at this, she said, pointing to a line item in the 2024 financial report. The HO paid $18,000 to Wellington Consulting Services for management fees. Okay, so? Wellington is Kathleen's last name. I looked it up. Wellington Consulting Services is registered to Kathleen Wellington at her home address in Willow Creek Estates. I stared at the paper. She is running a business from her home? Not just that, look at this. Emma pulled out another document. The HOA is registered as a 501(c)(4) nonprofit with the IRS. That gives them tax-exempt status. But one of the requirements for that status is that they operate exclusively for social welfare. Paying $18,000 to the HOA president's company seems like a conflict of interest at best. Can they do that? I do not know, but it seems sketchy. And look at these other expenses. She pointed to more line items. $5,000 to Desert Landscaping. That is owned by board member Rick Thompson. I checked. $3,000 to Valley Printing. That is owned by board member Susan Martinez's husband. I sat down, my mind racing. The HOA board was funneling money to their own businesses while threatening residents for making a few $100s a week. This is insane, I said. It gets better. Look at their budget for community improvements. They collected $200,000 in HOA fees last year. According to these reports, they spent $50,000 on actual improvements. Where did the rest go? I looked through the reports. The numbers were vague and hard to follow. Administrative costs, management fees, legal reserves, maintenance contracts. Most of the vendors were local companies that I could not easily verify. We need to report this, I said. To who? I do not know. Maybe the IRS? If they are abusing their tax-exempt status, that is federal fraud. Emma nodded. Let me do more research. If we are going to blow the whistle, we need solid evidence. Over the next 2 weeks, Emma became obsessed. She filed public records requests, searched business registries, and even drove by some of the vendor addresses listed in the financial reports. One address for a supposed pool maintenance company turned out to be an empty lot. Another vendor did not exist in any business database she could find. Meanwhile, I received my first fine notice. $100 for operating a business in violation of HOA rules. The letter stated that fines would continue daily until I proved compliance. I had 7 days to pay or face a lien on my property. I was furious. I had stopped making candles 2 weeks ago, right after the board meeting. I sent them a letter stating I had ceased operations. But apparently that was not good enough. I called the HOA management company, which was listed as Wellington Consulting Services. The phone number went to voicemail with Kathleen's voice on the recording. I left a message explaining that I had stopped the business and requesting the fine be rescinded. She never called back. 3 more fines arrived over the next 2 weeks, $400 total. Each letter threatened legal action and property liens. I felt trapped and angry. I considered paying just to end the harassment, but Emma convinced me to hold off. Once we report them to the IRS, all of this goes away, she said. Just wait a little longer. She finally compiled everything into a detailed report. 30 pages of documentation showing questionable expenses, conflicts of interest, missing money, and potential tax fraud. She found that Wellington Consulting Services had received over $70,000 from the HOA over the past 4 years. Rick Thompson's landscaping company had received $45,000, despite the community having minimal landscaping work. Several invoices were duplicated or did not match up with actual services rendered. The most damning evidence was a comparison of the HOA's tax filings with their internal financial reports. They were reporting lower income to the IRS than they actually collected, which reduced their tax liability. Even nonprofit HOAs have to report accurately. Misrepresenting income is fraud. Emma prepared packages for the IRS, the Arizona Attorney General's office, and the Arizona Department of Revenue. We mailed everything on a Monday morning, certified mail with return receipts. Now what? I asked. Now we wait. These investigations take time, but if the evidence is as solid as I think, Kathleen and her board are in serious trouble. I continued receiving fine notices. By early May, the total was over $2,000. I also received a notice that the HOA was placing a lien on my property for unpaid fines and assessments. This was getting out of control. I decided to attend the May board meeting. I needed to confront Kathleen directly and put pressure on her. Maybe if she knew I was fighting back, she would back off. The meeting was sparsely attended again. I sat in the front row this time. When Kathleen called for new business, I stood up. I want to address the fines I have been receiving, I said. I stopped my candle business weeks ago as requested, yet I keep getting fined $100 per day. I have sent multiple letters and left voicemails explaining this. No one has responded. Why? Kathleen looked at her papers, not meeting my eyes. Our records show you have not provided proof of compliance. What proof do you need? I do not make candles anymore. There is nothing to show. We need verification that you have closed your online store and ceased all commercial activities. I sent screenshots showing my Etsy shop is closed. What more do you want? We need to verify there are no ongoing sales, no inventory, no shipping activities. You want to search my house? If necessary, yes. The room went silent. A few residents shifted uncomfortably in their seats. That is invasive and unreasonable, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I have complied with your demands. These continued fines are harassment. Mr. Ramirez, if you do not like our rules, you are free to sell your home and move elsewhere. Until then, you will comply or face the consequences. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell her I knew about Wellington Consulting Services and the money she was funneling from the HOA, but Emma had warned me not to tip our hand. The investigations needed to proceed without interference. I will not pay these fines, I said. They are unjust and vindictive. If you want to pursue legal action, go ahead. I will see you in court. I walked out before she could respond. My hands were shaking with adrenaline. 2 weeks later, on a Thursday afternoon, I was working in my home office when my doorbell rang. I opened it to find a man in his 40s wearing a suit, holding a briefcase. Quentin Ramirez? Yes? I am Agent David Park with the IRS Criminal Investigation Division. Do you have a few minutes to talk? My heart jumped. Of course. Come in. Agent Park sat in my living room while I made coffee. Another agent, a woman named Jennifer Torres, joined him. They explained that they had received my sister's report and had been investigating for the past 3 weeks. Your documentation was very thorough, Agent Park said. We have been auditing the Willow Creek Estates HOA's financial records and tax filings. We have also interviewed several board members, and we have found significant irregularities, misreported income, fraudulent expenses, conflicts of interest, and potential embezzlement. The HOA's 501c4 status is in jeopardy. I felt a surge of vindication. So what happens now? We are continuing the investigation. We wanted to talk to you about the timeline and your interactions with the board. We understand you have been targeted with fines. I told them everything. The letters, the board meetings, the escalating fines, the lien threat. Agent Torres took notes while Agent Park asked follow-up questions. Did Kathleen Wellington ever explicitly acknowledge that you had stopped your business activities? Agent Park asked. No. Even after I sent proof, she kept issuing fines. Did she provide a legitimate reason for the continued fines? She claimed I had not provided adequate proof, but she never specified what would be adequate. It felt like she was moving the goalposts to justify the harassment. Agent Park nodded. That aligns with what other residents have told us. Several people reported similar treatment. The board has been aggressive in enforcing the business restrictions while simultaneously operating their own businesses and funneling HOA money to companies they own. Is that illegal? Depends on how it is structured. The conflict of interest is problematic but not necessarily criminal. However, the misreporting of income to the IRS is tax fraud. The inflated invoices and payments to fictitious vendors could be embezzlement. We are still building the case. The agents stayed for an hour, asking detailed questions about my interactions with Kathleen and the board. When they left, Agent Park handed me his card. If you receive any more threats or fines, let us know immediately, and please do not discuss this investigation with anyone except your sister. We do not want to alert the board before we are ready. I agreed, though it was hard to stay quiet. I wanted to shout from the rooftops that Kathleen was finally getting what she deserved. Over the next month, I noticed increased activity around Kathleen's house. Cars parked outside, people in business attire coming and going. The June HOA meeting was canceled without explanation. Rumors started spreading through the neighborhood. Someone said the board was being investigated. Someone else claimed the HOA was bankrupt. No one knew the truth, but everyone was speculating. I received one more fine notice in mid-June. $1,500 for unpaid fines and administrative fees. The letter threatened foreclosure proceedings if I did not pay within 30 days. I forwarded it to Agent Park. He called me the next day. Do not pay that. We are moving forward with charges. This should be resolved soon. How soon? Weeks, not months. We have enough evidence for criminal charges. The Arizona Attorney General is also pursuing civil charges for breach of fiduciary duty. On July 2nd, everything came to a head. I was grilling burgers on my back patio when I heard sirens. Multiple police cars drove down Tranquility Way and stopped at houses scattered throughout the neighborhood. I walked around to my front yard and saw officers approaching Kathleen's house 3 doors down. Other neighbors came out too, drawn by the commotion. We watched as officers knocked on Kathleen's door. She answered, looking confused and annoyed. One officer showed her a document, probably a warrant. Her face went pale. She stepped outside and they handcuffed her right there on her driveway. Someone started filming on their phone. Another neighbor whispered, "What did she do?" I watched silently as they led Kathleen to a police car. She was crying, protesting, but the officers ignored her. Other board members were arrested the same day. Rick Thompson, Susan Martinez, and 2 others I barely knew. All arrested on fraud and embezzlement charges. The news spread through Willow Creek Estates like wildfire. By evening, everyone knew the HOA board had been stealing money. The details were still murky, but the arrests were public record. People gathered in driveways and front yards, sharing theories and expressing shock. Agent Park called me that evening. I wanted to let you know personally. We charged Kathleen Wellington and 4 other board members with tax fraud, embezzlement, and wire fraud. The total amount stolen is over $300,000, spanning 5 years. $300,000? They were very creative. Fake vendors, inflated invoices, personal expenses charged to the HOA. Wellington Consulting Services was a shell company. Kathleen paid herself for management services while doing minimal actual work. She also used HOA funds to pay for personal vacations, car payments, and home renovations. That is insane. The other board members were complicit. They all received payments through their own companies or kickbacks from vendors. It was a coordinated scheme. When you filed your report, it gave us the opening we needed to investigate. What about the 501c4 status? Revoked. The IRS has determined that the HOA was not operating for social welfare purposes. They were essentially operating as a profit center for the board members. That violates the tax-exempt status requirements. The HOA will now owe back taxes, penalties, and interest. We are estimating over $100,000 in tax liability. I sat down, overwhelmed. What happens to the residents? The HOA will need to reorganize. You will probably need to elect a new board and hire legitimate management. The courts may appoint a receiver to oversee the transition. But the individual homeowners are not liable for the board's criminal actions and my fines. Null and void. Any liens or penalties imposed by the fraudulent board have no legal standing. You will receive documentation clearing your record. I thanked him and hung up. I should have felt victorious, but mostly I felt exhausted. This whole ordeal had consumed 6 months of my life. I just wanted to get back to normal. The local news picked up the story within days. HOA board arrested for fraud was the headline on Channel 12. A reporter came to Willow Creek Estates and interviewed residents. A few people talked about the aggressive enforcement and arbitrary fines. One woman mentioned being threatened for having her grandson's birthday party in the community center without permission. Another man described being fined for parking his work truck in his own driveway. The reporter asked if anyone wanted to go on camera to discuss the business ban. I declined, but Emma convinced me otherwise. You started this whole investigation, she said.
You should tell your side.
I reluctantly agreed. The interview aired on July 8th. I explained how the HOA had targeted my small candle business, issuing excessive fines while the board members were stealing hundreds of thousands of dollars. The story resonated. The segment went viral on social media, getting millions of views. People loved the irony of the HOA banning home businesses while running fraudulent businesses themselves. The fallout continued for weeks. Kathleen and the other board members were arraigned on multiple felony counts. Their bail was set at $50,000 each. Kathleen's husband posted bail, but the others remained in custody. The trial was scheduled for early October. In August, a court-appointed receiver took over HOA operations. His name was Thomas Grant, a retired accountant who specialized in cleaning up financial messes. He held a community meeting to explain the situation and outline next steps. The HOA's finances are in terrible shape, he explained to the packed community center. Between the stolen funds, back taxes, and legal fees, you are looking at a deficit of over $400,000. The room erupted. People shouted questions. How did this happen? Why did not anyone catch it sooner? What were we supposed to do now? Thomas raised his hands for quiet. The previous board hid their activities well. They controlled all financial reporting and prevented independent audits. Going forward, we will implement strict oversight measures. But in the short term, you need to decide how to cover the deficit. You mean raise our fees? Someone asked. That is one option. Another is to pursue civil litigation against the former board members to recover stolen funds. But that takes time and money. A third option is a special assessment. That meant every homeowner would be billed a one-time fee to cover the deficit. Depending on how the math worked out, that could be thousands of dollars per household. The meeting dissolved into chaos. People argued, blamed each other, and vented frustration. I sat quietly, grateful I was not responsible for fixing this mess. Over the next month, Thomas worked to untangle the HOA's finances. He brought in forensic accountants and lawyers. They traced every questionable transaction, identified stolen funds, and documented the fraud. The final report was damning. Kathleen had personally stolen over $140,000. Rick Thompson had taken $80,000. The others had each taken between $20,000 and $50,000. The criminal trial began in October. I was called as a witness to describe the harassment and fines I had experienced. The prosecution argued that the business ban was used as a weapon to distract residents from the board's financial crimes. By aggressively targeting small home businesses, Kathleen created conflict and controversy that diverted attention from her embezzlement. Kathleen's defense was weak. Her lawyer tried to argue that the payments to Wellington Consulting Services were legitimate management fees. But the prosecution showed that Kathleen did minimal work for that money. She had no employees, no office, no qualifications as an HOA manager. It was a shell company designed to funnel money from the HOA to her personal bank account. The jury deliberated for 2 days. On October 16th, they returned guilty verdicts on all counts for all 5 defendants. Kathleen was convicted of tax fraud, wire fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. The others were convicted of similar charges. Sentencing was scheduled for November. In the meantime, the civil litigation moved forward. The HOA sued the board members to recover stolen funds. Kathleen's assets were frozen, including her house in Willow Creek Estates. Rick Thompson declared bankruptcy. The others tried to negotiate settlements. The new HOA board, elected in September, worked with Thomas to stabilize finances. They secured a loan to cover immediate expenses and implemented a temporary fee increase of $50 per month. It was painful but necessary. They also rewrote the CC&Rs to allow reasonable home businesses that did not impact neighbors. The new rule permitted home offices, online businesses, tutoring, and similar activities as long as they did not generate traffic or noise complaints. On November 20th, Kathleen Wellington was sentenced to 6 years in federal prison. Rick Thompson got 4 years. The others received sentences ranging from 2 to 3 years. They were also ordered to pay restitution, though nobody expected to recover the full amount. I attended the sentencing hearing. Kathleen stood before the judge, crying and apologizing. She blamed stress, financial pressure, and poor judgment. The judge was unmoved. "You held a position of trust," the judge said. "Residents relied on you to manage their community fairly and honestly. Instead, you stole from them. You used your power to harass and intimidate people who questioned your authority. Your actions were calculated and deliberate. This was not a mistake. It was a crime." Watching Kathleen get led away in handcuffs, I felt a strange mixture of satisfaction and sadness. Satisfaction because justice had been served. Sadness because the whole situation was so stupid and unnecessary. If she had just left people alone, if she had not been so obsessed with control and power, none of this would have happened. By December, things were starting to normalize. The HOA was still dealing with financial problems, but the worst was over. Emma and I restarted our candle business, this time with the HOA's blessing. We even got a few orders from neighbors who had seen the news story and wanted to support us. I ran into Kathleen's husband at the grocery store in early January. He looked tired and defeated. His house was in foreclosure, and he was moving to Tucson to live with his sister. We made awkward eye contact in the frozen food aisle, but neither of us said anything. What was there to say? The civil lawsuit settled in February. The HOA recovered about $120,000 from various sources, seized assets, insurance claims, and negotiated settlements. It was not the full amount, but it helped. The special assessment was reduced to $1,500 per household, payable over 6 months. People grumbled, but they paid. By spring, Willow Creek Estates had moved on. New residents moved in, unaware of the drama that had unfolded. The community center added a plaque honoring Thomas Grant for his work stabilizing the HOA. The new board implemented transparent financial reporting and mandatory audits. I stayed in my house, though I sometimes thought about moving. The neighborhood held bad memories, but it also held a strange sense of pride. I had stood up to a bully. I had uncovered fraud. I had helped bring criminals to justice. That meant something. Emma and I expanded the candle business. We rented a small studio space in downtown Gilbert and hired 2 part-time employees. What started as a hobby became a legitimate small business, generating enough income that I could reduce my graphic design work. We started attending craft fairs and farmers markets, and our online sales grew steadily. In June, exactly 1 year after Kathleen's arrest, the HOA held a community barbecue. It was the first social event since the scandal, and the turnout was good. People were ready to move forward. I brought desert sage and citrus candles as party favors. They were a hit. I stood by the pool, eating a burger and watching kids splash in the water. A woman approached me, someone I vaguely recognized from board meetings. "You are Quentin, right? The candle guy?" "That is me. I wanted to thank you. My husband runs a small consulting business from home. He was terrified Kathleen would come after him next. When you fought back and exposed her, it took a huge weight off our shoulders. I am glad it worked out. It was brave what you did. A lot of people would have just paid the fines and moved on." I shrugged. "I was stubborn and lucky. My sister did most of the hard work." "Well, thank you anyway. This community is better because of you." She walked away before I could respond. I stood there, feeling unexpected emotion. I had not thought of myself as brave or heroic. I had just been angry and unwilling to back down, but maybe that was enough. Maybe standing up when it was easier to stay silent was its own kind of courage. The sun was setting over the palm trees, casting long shadows across the pool deck. Kids laughed and splashed. Adults chatted and drank beer. For the first time since moving to Willow Creek Estates, it felt like a real community. Not perfect, not without problems, but real. I finished my burger and walked home, thinking about how strange life was. 6 months ago, I was drowning in fines and legal threats. Now I was running a successful business and feeling hopeful about the future. Kathleen was in prison, the HOA was recovering, and I had proven that sometimes fighting back was worth it. My phone buzzed with a text from Emma. "Got another wholesale order, 300 candles. Can you help me pour this weekend?" I smiled and typed back, "Of course, bring beer." As I unlocked my front door, I glanced down the street toward Kathleen's old house. New owners had moved in last month, a young couple with a toddler. They had no idea about the history, about the fraud and arrests and drama. That was probably for the best. The past was the past. I went inside, poured myself a whiskey, and sat on my back patio. The Arizona evening was warm and quiet. In the distance, I could hear the community barbecue winding down, voices and laughter carrying on the breeze. I thought about calling my ex-wife to tell her about everything that had happened. She always said I avoided conflict, that I never stood up for myself. Maybe I had changed. Maybe the divorce and the move and the whole HOA nightmare had forced me to grow a spine. Or maybe I had always had it in me and just needed the right circumstances to bring it out. Either way, I was different now. Stronger, more confident, less willing to be pushed around. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a notification from our Etsy shop. Another order, this one for 12 candles shipped to someone in Seattle. I accepted the order and made a note to prepare the shipment tomorrow. As I sat there in the gathering darkness, sipping whiskey and listening to the desert night, I realized I was happy. Genuinely happy for the first time in years. The divorce had been devastating, the move had been scary, and the HOA battle had been exhausting. But I had come through it all intact. Stronger, even Kathleen Wellington had tried to crush me with her rules and fines and threats. Instead, she had inadvertently given me something valuable, the knowledge that I could fight back and win, that I did not have to accept injustice just because someone in authority said so, that sometimes the bullies were hiding their own crimes, and exposing them was the best revenge. I raised my glass in a silent toast to Kathleen, wherever she was in whatever federal prison she had been sent to. Thank you, I thought, for being so corrupt and stupid that you made it easy to take you down. Thank you for teaching me that standing up to tyrants is possible. Thank you for showing me that karma is real and eventually comes for everyone. The stars were coming out, bright points in the darkening sky. I finished my whiskey and went inside. Tomorrow I would pour candles with Emma. Next week I had a graphic design project due. Next month I was considering asking out a woman I had met at a craft fair, a potter named Sarah who had beautiful hands and a kind smile. Life was good, the HOA was stable, the criminals were in prison, and I was finally truly free. I went to bed that night thinking about all the residents who had been targeted by Kathleen's business ban. The piano teacher, the consultant, the tutor, the photographer. All of them had been harassed for trying to make a living from their homes. All of them had been victims of a corrupt board more interested in power and money than actual community welfare. The new HOA board had reached out to everyone who had been fined, offering apologies and refunds. It was a small gesture but meaningful. Some people declined the refunds, saying they just wanted to move forward. Others accepted gratefully, using the money to pay bills or take their families to dinner. I had declined my refund and asked that it be donated to a local charity. The board chose a homeless shelter in Phoenix, which seemed fitting. The money Kathleen stole had been meant for community improvement. Using it to help people who actually needed it felt like justice of a different kind. As I drifted off to sleep, I thought about the absurdity of it all. Kathleen had been so obsessed with stopping home businesses that she never considered her own hypocrisy. She banned residents from making a few $100s while stealing hundreds of thousands. She threatened people with fines while committing felonies. She positioned herself as the guardian of community standards while violating every principle of honest leadership. The IRS looking into the HOA's tax-exempt status had been the key. Without that investigation, Kathleen might have gotten away with everything. The business ban, ironically, had been her downfall. If she had not been so aggressive in targeting residents, no one would have dug into the HOA's finances. If she had just let people make their candles and teach their piano lessons, she could have continued stealing for years. But ego and power had made her reckless. She enjoyed the control too much. She loved having authority over others, loved enforcing rules and issuing punishments. That need for dominance had ultimately destroyed her. I woke up the next morning feeling refreshed. Saturday's sun streamed through my bedroom window. I made coffee, checked my email, and confirmed the weekend candle pouring session with Emma. She would arrive around noon with supplies and lunch. While waiting, I decided to take a walk around the neighborhood. It was a beautiful morning, temperature still comfortable before the summer heat set in. I waved to neighbors watering their lawns and walking dogs. Several people stopped to chat, mentioning the barbecue and expressing relief that the HOA drama was finally over. One elderly man named George, who lived on Serenity Drive, pulled me aside. "I wanted to tell you something," he said quietly. "My wife makes jewelry. Beautiful stuff, turquoise and silver. She sells it at craft fairs and online. Kathleen found out last year and threatened to fine us. My wife was terrified. She stopped making jewelry, stopped going to craft fairs. It broke her heart." "I am sorry," I said. "That is awful." "When Kathleen got arrested, my wife started making jewelry again. She is happier than she has been in years, so thank you. You standing up to them made all the difference." He shook my hand and walked away before I could respond. I stood there on the sidewalk, overwhelmed by the realization that my actions had rippled out further than I knew. I had thought I was just defending my own small business. I had not considered how many other people were being quietly oppressed by Kathleen's arbitrary rules. That afternoon, Emma and I poured candles in my kitchen. We worked efficiently, having perfected our process over months of practice. She mixed scents while I prepared jars and wicks. We talked about expanding the business, maybe opening a small retail location in addition to our studio space. You know what is funny? Emma said, pouring melted wax into a row of jars. Kathleen did us a favor. The news coverage from her arrest brought so much attention to our business. We have gotten hundreds of new customers just from people who saw your interview and wanted to support us. I had not thought about that. We should send her a thank you card in prison, Emma joked. I laughed. Maybe a candle. Desert sage and citrus, to remind her of what she lost. We worked for several hours producing enough candles to fulfill orders for the next 2 weeks. Emma left around 5 and I spent the evening packaging shipments and updating our online shop. Sunday was quiet. I did yard work, cleaned the house, and prepared for the upcoming week. Normal, boring activities that felt wonderful after months of stress and chaos. Monday morning I received an unexpected email. It was from a journalist at the Arizona Republic, asking if I would be interested in writing a first-person essay about my experience with the HOA. They were doing a series on HOA abuses and reforms, and my story fit perfectly. I thought about it for a day before agreeing. I spent the next week writing and revising, trying to capture the frustration and absurdity of the situation without being vindictive. The essay was published 2 weeks later under the headline, How My Candle Business Brought Down a Corrupt HOA Board. The response was overwhelming. The article was shared thousands of times on social media. I received emails from people across the country describing their own HOA horror stories. Some were comical, like being fined for having the wrong color doormat. Others were tragic, like elderly residents losing their homes over unpaid fines. The article sparked a conversation about HOA reform in Arizona. Several state legislators proposed new laws requiring financial transparency, independent audits, and limits on fines and penalties. One bill would create a state ombudsman to investigate HOA complaints. Another would restrict HOAs from banning reasonable home businesses. I was invited to testify at a legislative hearing in Phoenix. I drove to the state capitol on a Wednesday in late March and told my story to a committee of lawmakers. Other residents testified too, describing their experiences with abusive HOAs. The committee listened intently, asking questions and taking notes. One senator, a woman named Patricia Alvarez, thanked me personally after the hearing. Your story illustrates exactly why we need these reforms, she said. HOAs serve an important function, but they need oversight. Too often they become little fiefdoms run by people who abuse their power. I hope the laws pass, I said. No one else should have to go through what I did. We will do our best. The bills were still working through the legislative process, but I was optimistic. The media attention and public support gave them momentum. Maybe something good would come from this mess after all. By April, life had settled into a comfortable rhythm. The candle business was thriving. My graphic design work was steady but not overwhelming. I had even started dating Sarah, the potter I met at the craft fair. We had been on 4 dates and things were going well. Willow Creek Estates was peaceful. The new HOA board was competent and fair. They focused on actual community issues like maintaining common areas and organizing social events. The business ban was gone, replaced by reasonable guidelines that protected residential character without stifling legitimate home-based work. I attended the April board meeting, my first since Kathleen's arrest. The atmosphere was completely different. Instead of tension and hostility, there was collaboration and respect. Board members listened to resident concerns and worked together to find solutions. It was boring in the best possible way. After the meeting, the new HOA president, a friendly guy named Michael Chen, approached me. We are planning a memorial plaque for the community center, he said, honoring residents who helped expose the fraud and restore integrity to the HOA. Your name will be on it, if that is okay with you. That is not necessary, I said, embarrassed. Yes, it is. What you did mattered. You could have paid the fines and moved on, but you fought back. That took courage. We want future residents to know that this community values honesty and accountability. I thanked him and left, feeling a strange mix of pride and humility. I never set out to be a hero. I just wanted to make candles in my kitchen without being harassed. But sometimes ordinary people doing ordinary things in extraordinary circumstances end up changing the world, even if just a little bit. In May, 1 year after the IRS investigation began, I received a final letter from Agent Park. It was a formal notification that the case was closed. Kathleen and the other board members had been convicted, sentenced, and were serving their time. The HOA's tax-exempt status had been permanently revoked, but the organization was now operating properly and paying its taxes. Restitution payments were being made according to court orders. The letter ended with a personal note. Thank you for bringing this matter to our attention. Your diligence and persistence made this investigation possible. You should be proud of what you accomplished. I filed the letter away and went back to work. There were candles to pour, orders to ship, designs to create. Life moved forward as it always does. On a warm evening in late May, exactly 1 year after Kathleen's arrest, Sarah and I sat on my back patio drinking wine and watching the sunset. We had been dating for 2 months and things were getting serious. She was kind, funny, and talented. She understood the creative drive that motivated me. We worked well together. "Do you ever think about moving?" she asked. "After everything that happened here?" "Sometimes," I admitted. "But this is home now. I fought for this place. It would feel wrong to leave." "That makes sense. You have roots here. Besides, the HOA is actually good now. Michael and the new board are doing a great job. It feels like a real community." Sarah smiled and squeezed my hand. "You helped make it that way." We sat in comfortable silence, watching the sky turn orange and purple. Somewhere in a federal prison, Kathleen Wellington was probably sitting in a cell, thinking about the choices that led her there. Somewhere in the Arizona legislature, bills were being debated that might prevent other HOAs from becoming corrupt. Somewhere in Willow Creek Estates, residents were living their lives, making their candles and teaching their piano lessons and running their small businesses without fear. I thought about the journey that had brought me here. The divorce, the move, the harassment, the investigation, the arrests, the trial. It had been exhausting and stressful, but also transformative. I was not the same person who had moved into this house 18 months ago. I was stronger, more confident, more willing to stand up for what was right. Kathleen had tried to crush me with her rules and fines. Instead, she had forged me into someone who could not be easily broken. She had inadvertently given me the greatest gift, the knowledge that I could face injustice and win. As darkness fell and stars appeared in the desert sky, I felt a deep sense of peace. The battle was over, justice had been served, the community was healing, and I was exactly where I was supposed to be, living the life I was meant to live. Sarah leaned her head on my shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" "How strange life is. How a simple candle business led to all of this. Do you regret it?" "No, not even a little bit. It was worth it." We went inside as the temperature dropped. I locked the door, turned off the lights, and followed Sarah to the bedroom. Tomorrow would bring new orders, new designs, new challenges, but tonight I was content. The story of Kathleen Wellington and the corrupt Willow Creek Estates HOA board became local legend. People told it at parties and neighborhood gatherings, always with a mix of shock and amusement. How could they be so stupid? How did they think they would get away with it? Why did they target such a small business? The answers were complex: greed, ego, and a fundamental misunderstanding of their own vulnerability. Kathleen believed she was untouchable. She believed her position as HOA president gave her absolute power. She believed that residents would submit to her authority without question. She was wrong on all counts, and her downfall served as a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked power and the importance of accountability. As for me, I continued making candles, designing graphics, and building a life in Gilbert, Arizona. Willow Creek Estates remained my home. The HOA remained functional and fair. And every time I poured a batch of desert sage and citrus candles, I remembered the journey that started with a simple hobby and ended with justice served. The memorial plaque was installed at the community center in June. My name was listed along with Emma's and several other residents who had provided information during the investigation. It was a small bronze plaque, unassuming but permanent, a reminder that ordinary people could make a difference when they refused to accept injustice. I brought Emma to see it. She took a photo and posted it to social media with the caption, "Never underestimate what you can accomplish when you stand up to bullies." The post went viral again, generating thousands of likes and comments. People shared their own stories of fighting back against corrupt organizations and abusive authorities. It was inspiring to see how many people refused to be victims. That night, Emma and I had dinner at a Mexican restaurant in downtown Gilbert. We toasted to our success, to justice, and to the strange twists of fate that had brought us here. "You know what I realized?" Emma said, sipping her margarita. "Kathleen's biggest mistake was not the stealing. It was picking on you specifically." "Why do you say that?" "Because you are stubborn as hell. Anyone else might have paid the fines and moved on. But you do not back down when you think you are right. She chose the wrong target." I laughed. "I prefer to think of it as persistent. Stubborn, persistent, same thing. The point is, she underestimated you, and it cost her everything." We finished dinner and drove home through the warm Arizona night. The city lights twinkled around us, and the desert stretched out dark and vast beyond the suburbs. It was beautiful in its own harsh way. Much like the experience I had been through, the months that followed were peaceful. The candle business continued growing. Sarah and I moved in together, combining our creative spaces and building a life. The HOA functioned smoothly under Michael's leadership. The legislative reforms passed, bringing new transparency and accountability to HOAs across Arizona. Kathleen served her sentence quietly. I never heard from her, never received an apology or explanation. Part of me wanted closure, wanted to understand why she had been so cruel and corrupt, but mostly I just wanted to forget about her and move forward. In September, 18 months after her arrest, I received a letter forwarded from my old address. It was from Kathleen, postmarked from the Federal Correctional Institution where she was incarcerated. I almost threw it away without reading it, but curiosity got the better of me. The letter was handwritten, 4 pages on yellow legal paper. Her handwriting was neat and careful, each word precisely formed. Dear Quentin, I know I have no right to contact you, and I understand if you throw this letter away without reading it. But I wanted to apologize for how I treated you. What I did was wrong on every level. I let power go to my head. I became obsessed with control and lost sight of what actually mattered. I targeted you and others unfairly, using the HOA rules as a weapon to satisfy my own ego. I am deeply ashamed of my actions. I also want you to know that I am grateful in a strange way that you fought back. If you had not, I would have continued down that path until I destroyed myself even more completely. Your resistance forced me to confront what I had become. The investigation, arrest, and trial were humiliating and painful, but they were necessary. I needed to be stopped. I have a lot of time to think in here. I think about the damage I caused, the money I stole, the people I hurt. I think about my husband who divorced me and moved away. I think about my children who barely speak to me anymore. I destroyed my family and my life because I could not control my need for power. I do not expect forgiveness. I do not deserve it. I just wanted you to know that I understand what I did and why it was wrong. I hope you and the other residents of Willow Creek Estates are doing well. I hope the HOA is functioning properly now. I hope I did not cause permanent damage to the community. I have 4 more years of my sentence to serve. After that, I will try to rebuild my life. Though I know it will never be what it was. I will carry this shame forever. But maybe that is appropriate. Maybe that is what justice looks like. I am sorry, Quentin, truly and deeply sorry. Thank you for having the courage to stand up when it would have been easier to submit. You did the right thing even when it was hard. That is something to be proud of, Kathleen. I read the letter twice, trying to process my feelings. Was this genuine remorse or manipulation? Was she trying to make herself feel better by apologizing, or had she actually changed? I decided it did not matter. Whatever her motivations, the apology was something. It was acknowledgement and accountability. That was more than many people got from those who wronged them. I wrote a brief reply and sent it to the prison. Kathleen, I appreciate your apology. I hope you use your time to genuinely change and become a better person. The community is doing well. The HOA is functioning properly. We have all moved forward. I wish you the best in your recovery and future. Quentin, I never heard from her again. Years later, I occasionally wondered what happened to her after her release. Did she rebuild her life? Did she find peace, or did the weight of her crimes crush her? I hoped for the former, but suspected the latter. Life continued its steady march forward. The candle business became successful enough that I quit graphic design entirely and focused on it full-time. Sarah and I opened a retail store in downtown Gilbert, a beautiful space with exposed brick and large windows. We sold candles, pottery, and other handmade goods from local artists. The store became a gathering place for the creative community. We hosted workshops, art shows, and open mic nights. It was exactly what I had envisioned when I first started making candles with Emma, a place where creativity and commerce intersected in a healthy, sustainable way. Emma eventually moved on to other projects, but we remained close. She started a new business designing websites for small artists and makers. She used her experience investigating the HOA fraud to develop expertise in financial transparency and fraud prevention. She became a consultant, helping small organizations implement proper accounting and oversight. Willow Creek Estates thrived under proper management. Property values increased, new families moved in. The community center hosted regular events. The HOA operated efficiently and transparently with independent audits and strict financial controls. The nightmare of the Kathleen Wellington era faded into history. A cautionary tale told to new residents. Michael Chen served as HOA president for 3 years before stepping down. His successor, a woman named Lisa Rodriguez, continued his legacy of competent, honest leadership. The HOA became a model for other communities. Proof that these organizations could function properly when run by people with integrity. The legislative reforms implemented after Kathleen's arrest made a real difference. HOAs across Arizona were required to provide detailed financial reports, undergo annual audits, and allow homeowner access to records. Fines were capped at reasonable amounts, and disputes could be appealed to a state ombudsman. It was not perfect, but it was better. I occasionally spoke at HOA board meetings in other communities, sharing my story and encouraging transparency and accountability. I always emphasized that most board members were honest people trying to serve their communities. But the system needed safeguards to prevent abuse by those who were not. 5 years after Kathleen's arrest, Sarah and I got married in a small ceremony at our store. Emma was my best man, making a touching speech about how far we had come since those early days pouring candles in my kitchen. Michael and his wife attended, along with dozens of friends from the neighborhood and business community. Standing there in my store, surrounded by people I loved, I felt a profound sense of gratitude. The journey from divorce and isolation to this moment of connection and celebration had been long and difficult. But every struggle had been worth it. The HOA scandal was a distant memory now, something that happened to a different version of me in what felt like a different lifetime. But it had shaped who I became. It had taught me to stand up for myself, to question authority, to fight injustice even when the cost seemed too high. Those lessons carried through everything I did. They influenced how I ran my business, how I treated employees and customers, how I participated in my community. They made me a better person, even though I never would have chosen to learn them that way. As I stood at the altar holding Sarah's hands, promising to love and support her through whatever life brought, I thought about how unpredictable and strange existence could be. A year earlier, I had been alone and struggling, harassed by a corrupt HOA president over a small candle business. Now I was successful, in love, and surrounded by community. If someone had told me this would be the outcome, I never would have believed them. But that was the thing about life. You never knew where the path would lead. You just had to keep walking, keep fighting, keep believing that things could get better. And sometimes, if you were lucky and stubborn and willing to stand up when it mattered, they did.